So let's continue from our previous lesson. Up until now, we learned how to make table views and how to get access to our different table view methods. In this lesson, we want to learn how can we actually make a custom cell, because obviously not always the cells are going to be the basic ones, just the text or maybe just a subtitle. Maybe you want to make a very, complex custom cell that has so many custom stuff or custom outlets in it. So we will see that in this lesson. I'm going to head into Xcode, and in here I'm going to start myself a new project. Let's go ahead and say table views custom cell. So that's going to be what we want to talk about in here, is custom cells in table views. So to do that, the very first thing that we need is obviously we need a table view itself. So I'm going to come in here and say make me a table view, and this table view I'm actually going to put in here because I'm not really worried about the table view itself. We're mainly concerned about the cells in it. I am, however, setting the constraints for it because I want to make sure that I know where exactly it is going to be positioned. So this is where my table view is, and then the next thing is I actually want to add a table view cell to it, a single row of a table view. As we have seen before, in a table view, we can actually decide about the height of each row. I'm going to decide that it's going to be a lot taller, so the height of each of them is 128, so that's the one. And then usually we used to go in here and say the style is basic, or I don't know, the subtitle, but this time around I'm going to go ahead and leave it as custom. I'm going to say this is going to be a custom cell that I want to build myself. Now to do that, I have this in this area basically, which works just like any other view in iOS. So this space within the custom cell, the content view of it, is exactly like having any other view. So if I want to make outlets in it, I can make them as easily. For instance, I could go ahead and say here is an image view. So I want to have an image view within my cell, and then I also want to have a, let's say I want to have a title. Let's say I want to have a label like this. All right. And then I also want to have myself a text view. Keep in mind that for the most part, you probably want to have kind of objects that are not very interactive within your cells, especially if the cells are smaller like this one. Of course, you could have text that you can edit them, or buttons or anything like that, but it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you're making a smaller cells like this, it probably is a little difficult to interact with them. If you make larger cells, obviously then you can have edit text or anything like that. In any case, for this attempt basically, I'm going to go ahead and set some of my constraints manually. I'm going to say the height of this content view or cell is 128. Because it's 128, I'm going to make this image view to be 108. The reason I want to make it 108 is that I want to have 10 units on the top and left and bottom as margins. So 108 is basically 128 minus 20. This way I can actually drag this guy, put it in here at 10 units margin from my content view. And let's go ahead and set those two values, say 10 and 10, and I'm going to set the constraints for them. I'm going to say this is the top space, this is the bottom space. If top and bottom are taken care of, then we know the height. If we know the height, I'm going to go ahead and say there's an aspect ratio, and the aspect ratio of it is that the width of it equals the height of it. So we also got the width of it, and then I'm going to say let's get the leading space. So from my image view, I have the leading space, I have the top, I have the bottom, of course I have the height, and I have the width of it. Now that we have that, here are the things I'm going to do. I'm going to say the label against the image view has a horizontal spacing of 10, not 20, 10. It also has a trailing spacing of 10. So all of my spaces are going to be 10. And then I'm going to say from the top of the space, there's also another gap of 10. Let's say the height of it is going to be maybe a little bit larger, 32. And that should let me refresh this. Yes. If you want to see exactly where it is, we could basically give it a bit of a background color. that shows us exactly where it is. So that's where the spacing of it is. I'm going to keep that until I set up my text view as well. For my text view, I'm going to say I have a horizontal spacing, I have a trailing space, I have the bottom space, and I have the vertical space. And all of these four values have to be 10. So 10, and then 10, and then 10, and then 10, which basically makes my text view be exactly in this location, which is like that. So one of the numbers apparently went wrong. I wanted to give it 10, maybe I gave it 0. So the leading space, yes, I accidentally made it 0. I meant to be 10. So that's going to be the a little bit of a gap between each of these elements in here. And then what I could do is I could just change the background colors back to what they used to be, which is basically the default colors. Now I could go ahead and make some decoration on this. None of these things really matter in this lesson. You already know how to do that. But in any case, I'm gonna say this is the situation, and this text view, I'm gonna say it is not editable. So the user can't tap on it and edit. You can just view the text that is on it right now. That's pretty much it for my custom cell. Now we have to learn how we can actually use these custom cells. I'm not going to get into the details of the data structure in terms of how we are going to write our classes and make objects of them. I'm going to make them manually, but even making them manually needs that it has to have its own class. So to do that, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say Command N. I want to make myself a new file. What kind of file I want to make? I could make a Swift file and just write everything on my own, or I could make a CocoaTouch class, which basically is like a template. So I'm going to say CocoaTouch class, and in here I'm going to say I want it to be a subclass of UI table view cell, and I want to call it my custom table view cell, or anything that you want to call it, but it has to be the subclass of UI table view cell. We head next and we save it in here, and even if you made a mistake, it doesn't really matter, simply because the only thing that's important in here is this piece of code. Whatever you gave the name of your class has to be a subclass of UI table view cell, and none of these things matter either, so you can basically get rid of them. So my custom table view cell is a subclass of UI table view cell. How do we use this? I'm going to go to my storyboard. In my storyboard, just like how in the past we could select our view controller and then go up to the identity and we could see the class of it, I can do exactly the same thing for my cell. So I could actually go into my table view cell, this one, and then go up to the identity and give it the cell that I want, which in this case is my custom table view cell, which actually does an auto completion. So I hit enter, and then automatically the two of them are connected together. Everything else in here is exactly like what we have done many times in the past. Either drag and drop or manually write your outlets and connect them together. I'm gonna opt for the drag and drop this time, even though I usually do it the other way around. This time around, I'm gonna say this is going to be my basically my storyboard in here on the right. Then on the left, I want to see my cell, and of course I want to connect them together, or connect the outlets together. I'm going to drop this one, say make an outlet called img view. I don't think you can call it image view. You might want to double check that, but I think there is a default image view, so that's why I call it img view. And then this one, I'm going to call it my title, or let's call it title label. And then the last one, I'm going to call it txt view. So 3 different outlets, and they're all connected to outlets in my code. So if I have access to one of these guys, my custom table view cell, one of the objects of it, then I can get the image view, the title label, and the text view, and I can set them basically to my liking. So far we have our class for our custom cell, and we have our table view, but we haven't really used or populated our table view in any way. Let's see how we can actually do that. So I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to go to my view controller. This is where we have done things in the past several times. So I'm going to redo that in here. I'm going to say I have an IB outlet. I could use the same drag and drop as well, but this time I'm not going to do that. Weak variable IB outlet. Let's just make a variable because I want to make a table view. So I'm going to call it my table view, which is a UI table view. So this is my variable, and then I'm going to go ahead into a storyboard, connect the two of these in here. I'm going to say from the connection inspector, my table view is this table view. I'm going to remember to give my custom table view cell an ID. So the ID of it is my cell ID. Remember that even if we have a custom table view, we still need to give it an identifier, simply because there might be two custom cells in here. Simply there could be another custom cell in here that, let me duplicate this, add one in here, and we can actually see it. Maybe the second one didn't have this, but had a larger, label, or anything that you were doing in your application. So there might be more than one. Because of that, we have to clearly choose the identifiers for them. Like this current situation would actually crash our application because two of them, they have the same ID. So I don't have one of them anyway, I only have this one, and I have given it an identifier called myCellID. I usually like to copy this into my clipboard, so when the time comes for it, I know how to use it. Here, back in my code, I have my table view. I have it of the type UI table view, and then I have the two functions that I need: the number of rows and then the cell for row. And to be able to access those two functions, we have to conform our view controller to UI table view data source. And now we have access to those two, not with a colon, with a comma. And here I'm going to go ahead and say number of rows in sections. Again, I'm not going to worry about the data structure in here. I leave that data structure to you guys. But what I could do in here is this. I could just say return, let's say 3. So we're just going to return 3 cells statically. You have to actually come up with some sort of an array that has more content and return more values. But for me, I'm just going to make it return 3, and then cell for row at index path. The other part of data source that is absolutely necessary becomes like this. I'm going to go ahead and say let cell become table view, and then from the table view dot dequeue using this identifier that I had in my clipboard, and then for this index path, which is very simple. So we got the cell, and then we're going to return cell. Now here is the challenge that we have right now. This cell is of the type UI table view cell, and as we created it, it feels like it is a UI table view cell. We, however, have a different cell. Our cell is actually called my custom table view cell. So we have to take that into consideration. How do we do that? I'm going to say this cell is actually, I'm going to say explicitly is of that type. And let me reformat this a little bit so we can see it a little bit easier in here. So I'm going to reformat everything. So when I try to make a cell of the type custom table view cell equivalent to this, Xcode is going to give me an error. The error basically says I'm not sure if this object, the object that I'm trying to dequeue, is of the right type. But I am, as the developer, sure, because I'm using the right identifier. And because of that, I'm going to say as my custom table view cell. So I'm basically saying when you dequeue anyone with this identifier, it is of the right type. And that is basically why you give different IDs to different types of cells, because you want to know which one you're using in here. So that's pretty much it. We got the cell, and the cell is of the right type. Then obviously we can get everything that we want. So for instance, I could say cell, and then I have the text label, and then I can say text of it says hi, and then cell, I have the text view, and then the text of it can say this is a longer text that describes something. All right, and then with a lot of spelling errors, of course. And then there is a cell.img view that you could set the image of it to a UI image. I don't have a UI image in here, so I'm gonna say give me the background color of it to be a UI color.cyan, for instance. The goal in here isn't to deal with the data structure and making sure our table view is actually showing correct or useful values. It's just that we can see how we can use a custom cell. So my custom cell is now being populated properly 3 times. Before I run this application, I should remind myself of one thing, and that is my table view should get its data source from view controller. So we could do that either in the view did load, or we could go into the storyboard and in here say table view, drag it over view controller, and I want it to have the data source. Remember, data source is the way it looks, delegate is the way that you interact with it. So here, that's taken care of. My table view is now getting the data from view controller, and if we run the application now, we should be able to see it in here that we have these cells. Of course, they don't really work well, they're all doing exactly the same thing, but we do have custom cells now because each cell is now having the content that we created within our custom cells. So that's pretty much it, how we make custom cells. Making them in here is as simple as dragging and dropping objects. Then we assign it to a custom cell class. To do that, we basically select that object in here, and then we go to the identity window and we choose it to be the right type of class that we want. Then we obviously can connect the different outlets, in my case image view, title, label, or text view. And then the final step of it is that when you are populating it in your cell for row, you actually have to get the cell of that type. You basically have to force the DQ to tell it that the cells are of this particular type, because if they are of that type, you obviously get access to those outlets that you created. Once you have the outlets, then you decide what you want to do. If you had a database in here on a proper data structure, then for the label you would say something, for text view you would say another thing, and for the image view you would choose a different thing. So let's keep it up to here. The lesson is becoming a little long. This was how we make custom table view cells. I'll see you in the next lesson.